straight listeners, are you okay? Like,
Yeah, just DM us. Let us know if you're okay. Just in general. Because we worry about you a
we
lot.
really, really do. Because, like, it had so many of the tropes that are just unbelievable to me in a
Mm-hmm.
book of just like the controlling and possessiveness that comes like that shows up immediately for some reason as soon as they start fucking each other.
Yeah.
Um it reminds me of Love Island and like, you know, these people get paired up on a game show and then are immediately possessive of each other and mad that they have conversations with other people. Um the hate fucking is one that does not make sense to me at all. I don't understand it.
I can get it conceptually. I can see how those very heightened emotions and aggression just need to work their way out. I get it as a concept. In real life, maybe not. But in fiction, I can see it. And he's her boss, too, right?
He's her boss. Don't fuck your coworkers, especially don't fuck your boss.
Yeah, and if you're a boss, don't fuck your employees. This is a hostile work
Yeah,
environment.
that
HR should be
one.
notified. There's a lot of issues here.
She goes in to give him a presentation and it's a one-on-one thing and it like they start fucking by the fact that he starts feeling her up just like in this presentation. And I was like,
What kind
okay,
of office is it? What kind of job is she
marketing.
an marketing?
Mhm.
Why is she not working remotely? Why is she in the office?
Because the book was written in 2013.
Okay.
So,
This
yeah.
presentation could have been an email. Try it. How would you? He's sending her inappropriate Slack messages. I want this whole dynamic, but one of the employees is working from home and they have like a sexy Zoom call. I want that.
No, it's just really, really bad.
Oh, there's a
And
lot you could do with it. We can get back to that, but I just had a vision of the sexy Zoom call. You know, when I don't have a job that requires me to do Zoom, but I have heard that some people will just dress nicely from the waist up and then be wearing sweatpants or whatever. So, but on the sexy Zoom call, maybe they're in business casual from the waist up, but then surprise, no pants. There's possibility, is all I'm
I'm
saying.
now I'm thinking about the hysterical literature art project.
Oh, yes. That's basically that. You can Google it if you want to know what that is. But sorry, I didn't.
Not at work. Don't Google it at work.
Please don't. Oh my God. Speaking of things that are inappropriate for the office, just as a general rule, I think you shouldn't Google anything we tell you to Google on this show if you are at work.
One more thing on the romance book because I just need to get it out of my system. And it's
Yes,
been yelled
yes.
about in book club, and now it's been yelled about here on the podcast, which a bunch of our listeners are in our book club. So hi,
And this
months later,
podcast
let's
kind of is a
review
book
this.
club. So,
It is
you
a
know.
book club, but all of the sex scenes, of which there are a lot, but they're all written to sound like they happen in like 5 minutes.
Hmm.
And I'm gay. Uh,
Really? You don't say.
and so yeah, there's like no foreplay other than them arguing with each other. And then it's just like a quick fuck and that's the end of that. And I'm so confused as to just with all of the rest of this book being what it is, how it gets like how it's hot to people. I just don't understand.
Yeah, that's not much time at all. And I don't know, is it pretty because often when I read straight romances, their idea of what's super freaky is just cute to me. There was one book, Fantasy Lover, that one that I read ages ago.
Yes.
The protagonist was getting so worked up. She's like, "Oh my God, this lingerie I bought is so risque. It's red." And I'm just like, "Oh my God, really?" And then they just think that they're telling the most debauched possible story and it's just really vanilla and straightforward. Is this one of those? Besides the
No,
fact that they're doing shit in the office? Because that's
they
always funny to me.
definitely have elements that they bring up. um, that really should be pre-negotiated
Mm-hmm.
and aren't, because why
Of
would
course
you?
not.
No, of course not. They're not really to each other's needs. They just whatever. Not my problem. The book is done. I will give it a 2-star review and I will move on with my life. That's really all I have to say on that matter.
Well, you're very brave. Thank you for reading this book and reporting back on it so the rest of us don't have to.
You're welcome. But I did also, besides that terrible book, get to read a very good book today, which is, of course, The Two Towers by Professor J.R.R. Tolkien.
Amazing. So, should we tell the people what they're listening to and why we're here?
Well, today's topic, Sam, involves hobbits and where they're taking them. And where are they taking the hobbits, Sam?
And I noticed this immediately last time when we were reading that Merry and Pippin had been kidnapped. And I texted you, if there is one goddamn thing I know, it's where they're taking these hobbits.
Yeah. Well, they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, which we'll dig more into in a moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Fandom Apprentice. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ryn. I'm your so-called Tolkien expert.
And I'm Sam, your so called apprentice.
Yes. And together we are going to continue doing our queer reading of Lord of the Rings, be horny on Maine, and today we get to talk about trees
Yeah.
and
And
also
your
the rest of
favorite
these chapters.
character.
And my
Yeah.
favorite character in all of Lord of the Rings. I'm so excited.
So, did you have anything you wanted to start out with, or should we just get right into it?
I think we get into it with chapter 3, the Uruk-hai.
All right.
We go back in time a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned that to you and potentially on the podcast that we were going to be doing this a bunch through this book where we're traveling back in
Yes.
time to sort of like catch up with what's happening with all the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole chapter follows Pippin. We're in sort of like third person limited view with through Pippin's mind.
Yes, and I was really excited to get more of Pippin because, like we had mentioned previously, we haven't really gotten a lot of our secondary hobbits. It's mostly been Frodo and Sam. So we see a lot of his perspective and a lot of his growth in this chapter.
Yeah, it's fun. He's very much, I think you messaged me at one point that he's being forced to grow up really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is growing up very quickly, but it's kind of not necessarily his choice.
Yeah.
He made a bunch of choices as sort of an uninformed teen, and now these are the consequences.
I feel bad about how much we made fun of him earlier because he's not a very reflective person. He tends not to think about things before he says or does them. But I don't know, I feel like we were a little bit hard on him, and now seeing things through his eyes, he's doing his best. And he feels terrible. One of the first things that he's sort of thinking to himself is, how the fuck did I get in this situation? I've been kidnapped. I was stupid. And specifically, he says, what good have I been? Just a nuisance, a passenger, a piece of luggage. And now I have been stolen, and I am just a piece of luggage for the orcs. And that's rough, because he's not totally wrong. He hasn't really contributed a whole lot up until this point, but this is a bad time to have an existential crisis.
Yeah, but through that existential crisis, he is doing a lot to work towards his own escape.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, he's the
paying
mastermind in this
attention.
chapter.
Yeah. He's paying attention, lamenting perhaps that he doesn't necessarily know the area that they're in, but like he's trying to figure out, how he can pit the orcs against each other and like what he needs to be paying attention to, what their relationships are like, what he's listening to with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is Merry okay? How can he help Merry? What's his resources? Where like what's at his disposal?
Mm-hmm.
He is doing his best and he's doing quite well for the circumstances. Um, there is one line he mentions. They talk about like how they got captured and right before Boromir showed up. So he's talking about how like they got captured and Merry chopped off a great number of like arms and legs and hands from the orcs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, "Good old Merry."
Classic Mary stuff.
Yeah, definitely. This man who's never been in battle before.
But yeah, Mary cut off a bunch of arms and hands, which is so badass and cool.
Wonderful. And then but eventually like they got captured. The orcs were trying so hard not to fight them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Because
we learn why this is.
yeah, because they have orders to take them alive. And that's one of the things that Pippin finds out as he's listening to all of the conversations that are happening around him.
Right. One of the things that happens fairly early is we get a description of the Black speech being spoken, the Black speech of Mordor,
Mm-hmm.
of which the only like example that we have previously is the poem about the ring. Like that's the you know the one line that's carved onto the one ring, right? One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them. But that's in the Black speech of Mordor, Asnaz has Dorbatok. And so we have one line of Black speech here, which translates roughly to, Ugluk to the dung heap with the stinking Sauron filth.
Oh, damn.
So yeah, Ugluk, who is the Uruk-hai who we'll meet shortly, who seems to be in command, is not well liked. But they keep describing the language as being harsh and evil. And uh, I started thinking about what sort of phonemes Tolkien chooses for a particular language and
Mm-hmm.
sound symbolism,
Ooh.
right? Um, are you familiar with the Bubakiki effect?
Is that yes, I think so. That there's these two shapes, they're like kind of two
Mhm.
blobs, and one of them is really round and one of them is really pointy. And you ask people who speak different languages which sound they would associate with which shape. And I think like
Yeah.
Booba is the round one and Kiki is the pointy one.
Yes, and that
Yes.
is universal across several different like across cultures across the world. I know they did the experiment with English speakers in the US and in the UK, and with speakers of Tamil in India.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So languages that aren't related to each other,
Hmm.
but have this same association. And I was reading about sort of how Tolkien came up with the Black speech. It's not as developed a language, I think, as like Elvish or Western.
Hmm.
But one of the things that or, and Tolkien scholars have talked about is like it contains a higher percentage of consonants than Elvish does. So it's 63% consonants rather than like 52 to 55%, right? And the consonants used are more voiced plosives, which makes the language sound like explosive and punchy.
Ooh, interesting.
So, but it's interesting to think about that um, in context of world languages because there are plenty of world languages that have that nature to them. Like people say, Russian or German sounds angry, but that's not true. You can still say really gorgeous, kind things in Russian and German because
Hmm.
they're complete languages,
Yeah.
right? And I have to wonder in this reading that we're doing, where we are trying to assign humanity to these inhuman creatures. And, we know Tolkien didn't write poetry in the Black speech. Um, but is there poetry? Is there songs? Is there beauty in this speech that we just don't get to see?
I mean, I
I'm
think there
sure there
has to
is.
be. Yeah, because I mean, my immediate mental connection, just thinking about other similar creatures is thinking about Klingons and the whole thing about how opera is such a huge part of their culture, and Worf loves Klingon opera and Klingon poetry, and he just sits around in his room blasting really loud operas for himself. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they might have a different idea of beauty and different values, but even without seeing that aspect, just watching them interact socially and have their own sort of inner political squabbles in this chapter was so interesting because it gave them so much depth. And we had talked earlier about orcs just being sort of the cannon fodder that we're not supposed to feel bad for. And these particular orcs are kidnapping our friends and being violent and terrible, but they have depth and they have individual personalities and likes and dislikes, and I love that.
Yeah, we have three different groups of orcs. We have the Moria orcs who've come south for revenge.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Mordor orcs who are led by Grishnak, and
Grishnak.
we have the Isengard Uruk-hai who are led by Ugluk.
So are any of those the white skins, or are the white skins something different? Because I didn't understand who they were.
The Whiteskins are humans.
Okay.
Whiteskins are the Rohirrim.
Okay. Got it.
So when they're describing being, being afraid of the Whiteskins, being caught by the Whiteskins, they're referring to the Rohirrim. Because if the Rohirrim catch them, which ultimately, spoiler alert, happens,
Has
uh,
already happened, technically.
has happened, depending on what time frame you're orienting yourself in, they will kill them all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, you know, we can see these, internal squabbles and these differing motivations between these three different groups. Um, they have a full like page long argument over who they serve and where the hobbits are to be taken.
Yeah. Yeah. And Grishnak is talking about how he thinks Saruman is full of shit and anyone who aligns himself with him is going to get screwed over, and he only answers to Sauron. And there's a bunch of
Mhm.
other stuff in there as well. But I liked that. I liked the awareness of who's really in charge.
Right, because ultimately Ugluk says basically the Uruk-hai, which Uruk-hai in their speech means orc folk, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's generally used to refer to these larger, more human-like orcs out of Isengard who can run in the daylight.
So, can the regular orcs not run in the daylight? Because they talk about that, but it doesn't seem like they're like trolls who turn to stone in the daylight. Do they just not do well in the light?
Yeah, I think they've essentially got the sunlight sensitivity trait from D&D. They
Or
don't see
from
super
side
well.
effects of taking certain antidepressants, like me.
Mood.
Fun fact, if you're on a lot of different medications, actually can cause photosensitivity, and I didn't know that until I had been on a certain medication for several years, and that's why I burn to a
Oh,
crisp the
same.
moment I go outside. So research your medications, kids.
Yeah, one of my meds gives sunlight sensitivity, and I didn't know this for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Fun stuff.
Why is everything so bright?
We love nature. Nature just doesn't love us back.
And we'll talk more about that in the next chapter.
Yes. I wish we could be under the peaceful shade of the Ents in their forest, but we're not there yet.
No. Also, in the assigning, humanity and goodness to these creatures who are innately not, I want to talk about orc gender.
Yes, please. We have a lot of gender to talk about in these chapters. Tell me
We have
about
so
orc
much
gender.
gender to talk about. Ugluk seems to be like the one who primarily gets gendered pronouns, but like about half the time, Tolkien uses he for orcs, and the other half the time, he doesn't use gendered pronouns at all. He refers to them as it or uses terms like the evil voiced one.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. Um, I have a feeling it's because Tolkien was trying to make them seem like less than human, but in our queer reading here, I think we can say instead it's because orcs, like everyone else in the story aside from humans, don't have recognizable genders to us,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have orcs that, vaguely resemble men but aren't.
Hmm.
And we have orcs perhaps that don't really resemble men.
Yeah, because some of them really, yeah, they don't resemble humans at all. So how do you even map human sexes, let alone genders, onto these creatures?
Yeah. Um, Also, when Ugluk refers to Saruman, he uses a capital H, he, like you'd capitalize a deity or, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't really have more on that, but I like to think about it. I want to see an orc family. I want to see a broader orc social structure. I need more information because we have our own theories about sort of D&D style orcs, but now I just want an anthropological study to tell me more about the way they live.
Yeah. I mean, we had the Great Goblin in The Hobbit, but we don't really
Hmm.
have much more than that.
Yeah.
Eventually, Merry wakes back up, and I love that his first words are about food.
Hmm. He's a hobbit.
It's his main focus.
Yeah.
He's, had a head wound and been kidnapped, and his first thing is to ask about bed and breakfast. The orc liquor is kind of interesting. It's like the Mirivore from Rivendell, but bad.
Hmm. And Pippin drinks it, and I think, does Merry refuse, or does it just take him a while and then they sort of force feed it to him?
They
I would
force
need
fed
to,
it to him.
yeah, because they need
Um,
them to keep moving.
yeah, but like both the orc liquor and the Mirivore like give you warmth and strength. And I found it kind of interesting because later on, we can dig more into this later, but Treebeard later says orcs were made in mockery of elves.
Hmm.
And so I think it's interesting that we can draw this parallel also to like some of their physical items that they have being
Yeah.
similar, just
Hmm.
corrupted. I couldn't tell if the recurring vision that Pippin has of Strider tracking them is like magical in nature or like wishful thinking.
I think that it's probably wishful thinking. I am willing to attribute a lot of newfound awareness to Pippin, but I don't think he has powers in that way.
No, I think Aragorn has magic. We've seen him use minor sorts of magic,
Hmm.
more or less, but I don't think Pippin has any sort of magic other than like the small magic that makes hobbits stealthy, which is
Yeah,
already.
because we've seen Aragorn communicate with Arwen that one time in Lorien, but I think we decided that was kind of a combo of his abilities and Arwen having her own ability to hear him. So they sort of had the capacity on both sides. But
And perhaps the location. And I was also thinking about the healing magic sorts of things with the Athalas and the brewing of the
mhm,
potions that he does, and the listening to the earth. Although that's a whole other thing. That's something you can actually do.
yeah,
Um,
as we talked about last time,
yes, but Pippin, we get to the little part that orients us in time, sort of, where Pippin runs to drop the brooch off his Lorien cloak.
which is so clever because he's thinking as he's having these visions of Strider, he's thinking about how they're going to be found because he kind of understands that him and Mary alone are not going to be able to escape necessarily. And so he's really counting on the rest of the party to come find them. And so he's thinking, okay, they will be able to follow the trail of the orcs because they're just trampling the ground underneath them. But how will they know that Mary and I are also there? Because we're little and they're carrying us and we're going to get lost in the rest of these tracks. So I need to make my own distinct tracks so that if they follow us, if they find us, they'll know that they're going in the right direction. So he sort of breaks away from the group and rolls around in the mud a little bit to leave some distinct impressions,
Yeah,
and then also drops his brooch just as a final, this was definitely me, which was really clear headed, especially given the circumstances.
yeah, he's especially considering he's also had a head injury, if a more minor one than
Hmm.
Mary. Like he's doing great. But a bunch of the Moria orcs leave, and we're left with fourscore Isengarders. So 80 Isengarders, and then Grishnak and the Mordor orcs show back up.
Hmm.
And I was trying to sort of track where they were, but I think basically they went west through the Emyn Muil from Sarngabir to the plains, and then west across the plains to the Entwash, and then north along the Entwash to the borders of Fangorn.
Okay.
So, and as I said last week, this piece of the map will be posted on our Instagram along with Booba and Kiki this week. So you can
Yes.
also take a
Yes.
look at all of that.
My next note is about Grishnak and Pippin's conversation with him. So I don't know if you had anything in between there.
I guess leading up to Grishnak taking them and their conversation with Grishnak is they come up the Entwash and they notice that riders are gaining on them from behind because
Hmm.
earlier they sent out scouts and a lone scout for the Rohirrim spotted them and they let him get away.
Hmm.
Which means the Rohirrim now know that there's a large company of orcs in their land.
Yeah.
And so they are coming to take care of that little problem.
That's one way of putting it.
Yes. But as night falls, the Rohirrim catch up and they sort of are waiting each other out through the night, right?
Hmm.
And but because Ugluk is waiting for reinforcements from someone called Mauher, who's I guess in the trees somewhere. But the Rohirrim kill some orcs in the night. They sneak up, and so Ugluk and his men go off to stop a full battle, which leaves Merry and Pippin unguarded.
Yeah. So Pippin, in his clever listening to all the orc dynamics, has figured out that Grishnak knows about the ring and wants it. And so he tries to imply that he has it and strike a deal with Grishnak to set them free in exchange for the ring that he doesn't have. And Merry also catches on to this and plays along really well, and there's some good teamwork there. And my favorite thing about this is that Pippin does the whole Gollum throat noise, my precious thing, which I'm not sure if he knows that Grishnak knows about that being related to the ring, but he really sells it. And it was a really sort of unsettling performance to see him give.
Yeah, but the downside is he pushes Grishnak a little far, and if the rider had not come along and killed Grishnak, Grishnak would have killed them and searched their corpses for the ring.
Yeah.
But Grishnak goes to take them off and gets himself killed.
Yeah. And luckily, after he gets killed, Merry and Pippin are hiding in their elven cloaks and somehow don't get trampled by the horses who come through at that moment.
Mhm.
Um,
But early on, Pippin freed his hands. So Pippin now finally has a use to for his free hands that he's had this whole time.
oh, yeah, because we totally skipped over that. There's a guard that gets killed, and his body falls down on top of Pippin, and the guard had his knife in a literal death grip. And so, luckily, the guard is holding his knife nice and tight forever, and Pippin can just kind of wiggle the restraints off of his wrists, but also has the presence of mind to retie them, but loosely, so it looks like he's still bound up. So, he's really
Mhm.
doing pretty well for himself in this part.
Yeah. But he makes use of his free hands to get himself and Mary free. And of course, the first thing they do is eat lembas,
Yes, as they should.
as they should. But like in this battle zone with the orcs nearby, the first thing they do is
They are
um,
true to their hobbit nature and true to Pippin's tookish nature, which I know is something that we've been keeping an eye on specifically through all
mhm,
of these books. And we have a little bit of commentary on that. And I think this is right after they get away from sort of the main fray of things.
mhm.
You seem to have been doing well, Master Took, said Mary. You will get almost a chapter in old Bilbo's book if I ever get a chance to report to him. And then there's some more stuff, and then in between. I shall have to brush up on my toes if I am to get level with you. Indeed, cousin Brandybuck is going in front now. This is where he comes in, referring to himself. I don't suppose you have much notion where we are, but I spent my time in Rivendell rather better. So we get a compliment on the Tookish nature, and also a little jab and a little discussion of the Brandybuck nature of having actually spent time in Rivendell learning about things and preparing for the journey instead of just fucking around. But that was a lovely little exchange.
Multiple things percolating. Thing one is I noted that exact line as well.
Amazing brain cell. Love it.
But I noted you will get almost a chapter in old Bilbo's book if I ever get a chance to report to him. And I love that because this is Bilbo's book.
Yeah, this is the chapter.
And Pippin got a chapter.
Of course he did.
Which is perfect. And also, I love Merry being like, I spent my time in Rivendell better, because Pippin literally admonishes himself earlier in the chapter for not spending his time in Rivendell well.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you saying him fucking around, my brain now is going that he had some trysts with elves while in Rivendell, and that was how he spent his time.
I mean, he might have.
This man is an irresponsible college freshman. Like,
I'm sure there are some irresponsible elves who would be down. Yeah, I don't think of the elves as particularly horny most of the time, because they're written as kind of serious. But I'm sure there were a couple around who'd be like, yeah, sure. You know what? You might die, I might die. Let's just go for it.
Anyway, we get to the end. They flee into the wood as the Rohirrim kill all the orcs. And dawn came, red as flame.
And our timelines are starting to line up a little bit more because we have the orc killing that happens pretty shortly before the events of the last chapter. So it's not too complicated because we had talked so much about the timeline back and forth. I was kind of worried that it would be confusing, but it's really not. If you're reading along or if you're interested in reading, it's pretty clear what's happening.
Yeah, I think so. Moving on to chapter 4, Treebeard, if you would, unless you have anything else for chapter 3.
No, that was about it. I enjoyed it, but especially keeping track of all the orc names made it hard for me to really understand everything that was happening. And we have so much to say about Treebeard. I'm good to just keep going.
I'm so excited to talk about Treebeard.
I know, because you had been telling me for ages, we're going to meet my favorite character, and I didn't know who it was. And now I do, and he's delightful. So the Hobbitsies run into the woods, which are very shabby and kind of creepy. And there's a quick mention that they heal extremely fast from all of their cuts and sores, but they're too busy to notice. And then that's not really followed up on. I don't know if that's residual effects from the orc liquor or if it's the magic of the woods or if it's something else. I don't know if you had commentary on that.
I also noted that. I was thinking basically there's magic in the forest and the waters of the Entwash and the lembas that they ate.
Mm-hmm.
Because later on when they drink the Ent draft, they compare it to the Entwash because they drank from the Entwash.
Yeah.
And we know the lembas gives you strength and keeps you moving. And we know, that the orc medicine does keep you going. It's not pleasant, but it keeps you going. So
It works.
I think the combination of all of those things together made them heal up quickly and gave them that vigor.
Mm-hmm.
But they climb up onto a hill. They see the smoke from the fires the Rohirrim have set on the bodies of the orcs. And Pippin goes, he almost felt like he liked the place. And then we get the introduction of my favorite character in the entire series.
Yes, I think you should open up with this part.
Almost felt like you liked the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you, said a strange voice. Turn round and let me have a look at your faces. I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty.
What a lovely introduction that just sets the tone for everything else that Treebeard is going to do. So as a being, as a character, what they're seeing is this creature is like 14 feet tall, has these giant feet, moss and lichen everywhere, has this kind of tree bark body, but also brown skin. His arms are like made of skin. And Pippin especially is really transfixed by his eyes. And we get a really long description of what Pippin has said afterwards in trying to explain what looking into those eyes was like. And I don't have that quote written down, but I can find it, or we can move on from it.
One felt as if there was an enormous well behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. It felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep, you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a perfect description of the Ents.
Yes.
um, he mentions, like Treebeard again. We'll have commentary on Ent gender later too.
Oh yeah, I think once we get to the Entwives,
Yeah,
after we get into that, then we'll have a fuller picture.
yes, but he mentions, do not be hasty is his motto, and he liked the nice little voices. They reminded me of something I cannot remember.
And we'll get more into that too, because there's some stuff that Treebeard says that absolutely breaks my fucking heart.
I love the culture clash we get this chapter, right?
Yeah.
Hobbits are a hasty folk and reveal their names and lineages like by way of introduction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Ents give names that some call them, but they don't give their true names. They don't give information about themselves.
Yeah, because when they first have their initial meeting, Treebeard is trying to figure out what they are. And he sings this little song that's the lore of all the living things. And, there's elves and dwarves and men and beavers and other animals. And Merry and Pippin take offense that hobbits are never included in this type of lore song, and they suggest that another line should be added to honor the hobbits, and Treebeard suggests one, and they say, okay, that's good, but you have to put us with the other free people. You have to include us up in the big paragraph. Don't just stick us at the end. Hobbits deserve representation too.
Yeah, is we always seem to get left out of the old lists and the old stories, said Mary, but yet we've been around for quite a long time. Um,
And yeah.
the elves don't write anything down, or not the elves. The Ents don't have a written language, and so they have this oral history, this oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Was sort of what I was getting out of this, right? They have to have a story that tells about everything because they don't have all this information written anywhere.
Yeah, and they don't need it written. That's not, because again, they're not hasty. They have enough time, they have infinite time to communicate. And Treebeard talks about the speech of Ents being something they don't use a lot. They don't speak unless they have something that's worth taking the time to say and taking the time to listen to.
I love this idea of like Entish language essentially being a ritual tongue.
I love that. Yes.
Um, and names, we talked too about names being what you are and how you refer to yourself. And the fact that like Entish names tell you who they are and their whole history, like within the name itself, is really cool. This
I wrote
concept
down
of the true name.
I wrote down the line about that because, like you said, Merry and Pippin introduce their full selves by way of introduction. Well, first they just say they're hobbits, and Treebeard goes basically, that was really nice of you to trust me by saying who you are, but please, for the love of God, do not just go around saying your true name to people. And Merry and Pippin double down and say, oh, hobbits, that's not our true name. That's just the kind of people we are. Here's our full government names, both of us. And Treebeard doesn't face palm, but we can imagine it. Just going, oh my god, I am going to have to look after these dumb little creatures, which is the exact same energy as Strider way back in the Prancing Pony when
Mhm.
the hobbits are just sharing way too much information. And then they ask Treebeard what they should call him and what his name is. And he refuses to give his true name and says, now connecting back to what you were talking about, for one thing, it would take a long while. My name is growing all the time, and I've lived a very long, long time. So my name is like a story. Real names tell you the story of the things they belong to in my language, in the old Entish, as you might say.
It's so cool. It's so
Yeah,
cool.
I love that. And especially, thinking about all the other things we've said about names having power and Frodo having a traveling name and your name reflecting your journey. And also, as queer people, your name telling the story of who you are. That's just beautiful.
Hmm. Um, there's a comment too when he's like chanting that it's like discord on a great organ.
Hmm.
Music is language, is magic, is music.
I love that. Put that on a t-shirt.
Check out our red bubble. We don't have one. Uh,
One day.
maybe. But Gandalf just kind of like pops into conversation because, you know, he's never going to be fully gone.
Because
Um,
he's still alive, totally, or will at least come back.
so they mention that Gandalf has fallen out of the story,
Hmm.
which is really interesting phrasing because in Icelandic and Norse sagas, there's a recurring trope where the author, after a character has been mentioned for the last time, will say something like, and now he is out of the story, and now he is out of the saga, or what have you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then that's how you know the character is done.
Hmm.
And that can be because they're dead, and that can be because they're just like not going to be mentioned again. They're not important enough.
Hmm.
But Gandalf has fallen out of the story.
Yeah. And
Which
that really endears them to Treebeard because Treebeard was very fond of Gandalf.
he was the only wizard that really cares about trees.
Yeah. Which I would think that would be Radagast the Brown because he's all about the animals and stuff, but I guess Gandalf is in higher esteem.
Which this piece of phrasing, and Gandalf being held in high esteem here, again, we've talked about Gandalf essentially being Odin.
Hmm.
And that's who he's based on. I just like that piece of phrasing with the knowledge that Gandalf is based on Odin and coming out of a saga.
Yeah.
Anyway, they talk about they're getting ready to leave, and they're discussing, again, names and language and the name of the hill, like what a hill
Hmm.
is called.
And that it's, if you want to call it a hill, but that doesn't really do justice to how ancient and majestic it is. Let's see if I can find the line, unless you have it written down.
I do.
Of course
It's
you do. Thank you.
let us leave this. What did you call it? Did you say what you call it? Hill, suggested Pippin. Shelf, step, suggested Merry. Treebeard repeated the words thoughtfully. Hill, yes, that was it. But it is a hasty word for a thing that has stood here ever since this part of the world was shaped. And we see a little piece of Tolkien's Catholicism / lack of knowledge about plate tectonics.
Yeah, because hills are these things that never come and go or change for any reason.
Mm-hmm. But Pippin asks him what side he's on. Which
Hmm.
side are you on? Is he fighting for the Union or J.H. Blair? And Treebeard is like, I'm not on a side. I'm on my side.
Yeah. Which is, again, more of that sort of ambivalence about the natural world or ambivalence of the natural world that we've seen in other land spirits, that they're not interested in mortal affairs, but he is definitely on the anti Sauron / Saruman side.
Yeah, and I have a little more commentary on that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, it'll get peppered throughout, but they start talking about Lothlorien and how Celeborn warned them about Fangorn,
Hmm.
and Treebeard's like, "Ha! He warned you about me. I would have warned you about him." You know, Lorelin Doranan, the land of the Valley of Singing Gold, and then he's sort of chanting and refers to the Laurelin Doranan Lindel Orendor Malin Ornelian Ornemalin, he hummed to himself. Um, and then he gives a line, Torelel Lomea Tumballe Morna Tumballe Torea Lomeanor. And the first one, the that starts with the Laurelin Doranan, um, these are pieces of basically Entish phrasing of Quenya words, Old
Ooh.
Elvish, right? Because Entish is like the Black speech in agglutinative language, which means like it's, meanings of words and endings of words are combined together to create a single word. German's an agglutinative language.
Hmm.
Right? So you get these really long words that you can piece the meaning together based on each of the elements of the word,
Hmm.
right? And that Laurelin Doranan Linda Lorendor Malinorne Helion or Nemalin means golden light, music land, valley, music, dreamland of yellow trees, tree yellow.
Oh, I like that. That's very
Uh,
charming.
yeah, which sort of it's golden land of the singing wood, or land of the valley of singing gold. There we go, or the dream flower, right? And then that other phrase uh, that he says is forest many shadowed, deep valley forested, gloomy land, which is referring to Fangorn, which sort of means, there is a black shadow in the deep dales of the forest,
Hmm.
right? He's explaining that parts of this forest are dangerous, like the old forest, but more so, right? Like Tom Bombadil and like Elrond, he mentions that basically all of Eriador used to be one giant primeval forest, right? And he almost admonishes Celeborn for not staying up with the times. He says they are falling rather behind the world in there, I guess.
Hmm.
Which is kind of interesting because he's also incredibly ancient.
Yeah, and we get a lot of many, many references to that, but my two favorite ones are when he talks about young Sauron down at Isengard, and later talking about, uh, I think he's talking about Lorien saying, "It is what it is when Celeborn was young." And we have already established that Saruman and Celeborn are both very old. So Treebeard basically referring to them as fucking whippersnappers
Yeah,
is really putting things in perspective.
it's interesting because, like, I think, despite the fact that they are younger, Treebeard is more tuned in to the changing of the natural world around him.
Hmm.
Whereas we saw Lorien is set apart, right? The elves in it are kind of isolated and cut off from the outside world inside their woodland realm. And
Hmm.
so, Treebeard pays attention to what's been going on in the world, even though, and change in the world is slow, but he knows that there's been change.
Yeah, and change is part of the natural order. So it makes sense that he would be tuned into that instead of this sort of stagnant bubble.
Yeah, I had some sort of thoughts on like these immortal beings that we've seen, right? We've got Bombadil and Galadriel, and Gandalf and Treebeard are probably the like oldest lived beings that we've met.
Hmm.
These sorts of immortal beings, I feel like, are the ones that are primarily outside of Tolkien's black and white morality.
Yeah.
right? It's these ancient primeval creatures that don't fall into good and evil so much as they fall into order and chaos.
Hmm.
Because those are the true primeval forces.
And you've talked about that. I'm not sure if it was on the show or just to me personally, about that being a thing in Norse mythology too, about
Hmm.
order and chaos instead of good and evil as being the primary distinction.
Yes, and actually, I will talk about that more at the end of this episode.
The
um,
brain cell.
yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But anyway, he chants an old walking song about old places he used to walk. And then he
And
reaches home.
I have a couple of little
Please.
things related to that before that. So while he's walking and singing the song, he's carrying Merry and Pippin. And there's the line, holding the hobbits gently but firmly, one in the crook of each arm, which I love that image. That's it's just like Merry and Pippin are two cats that he's found, and he's just kind of gently bemused by their antics and is going, oh, I've found these strange little creatures. Okay, I'm gonna pick you up and carry you home and give you some food and let you sit on my big table. And that sort of, it's not like he's treating them as pets or treating them as lesser. He's just kind of delighted by them and delighted by a lot of things. And later on, that delight takes on kind of an edge of sadness because thinking about orc families, we can also talk about ent families. And then it just breaks my heart a little bit later, but we'll get there. But he just seems to be full of a lot of joy. And this walking song that he's singing is about these beautiful places and how much they delighted him and how he just enjoyed being there and looking at the trees and looking at the sky. And I think he's probably the happiest character that we've met just overall.
I'm going to say Tom Bombadil is the happiest, sort of most carefree being. I'm so interested to think about, if all of this was one giant primordial forest, and Tom Bombadil is the spirit of that forest, and yet the Ents are the primordial beings who inhabit that forest. I'm really interested to know about like their relationship in the early days of the world.
Yeah. Because also in this sort of section, Treebeard talks about not elves, ents are to trees as elves are to men, roughly. So they also, we can sort of put that in a similar perspective with them related to Tom and being not quite on his level of power and immortality, but still being a cut above your typical forest tree.
Right. They talk about Ents getting tree-ish and trees getting entish.
Mm-hmm.
One of the groups of another type of being, which isn't defined here, but is referred to here, and they'll give them a name in a couple of chapters, are Huorns, which are basically the more intelligent trees.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are good, and some of them have those hearts of black that he mentioned, like Old Man Willow.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think Old Man Willow is one of these Huorns, but there's no Ents up there.
Mm-hmm.
But they come to Welling Hall, which is one of Treebeard's homes. And it's so gorgeously described.
Yeah, he's got this giant stone table and this beautiful waterfall, and it just sounds like a lovely place to be.
Mhm. And then he gives them Ent Draft, which this is what I
Yes.
have tried to replicate as cocktails at our Hobbit parties.
Which have been extremely delicious.
The drink was like water, indeed very like the taste of the draughts they had drunk from the Entwash near the borders of the forest, and yet there was some scent or savor in it that they could not describe. was faint, but it reminded them of the smell of a distant wood borne from afar by a cool breeze at night. The effect of the draught began at the toes and rose steadily through every limb, bringing refreshment and vigor as it coursed upward right to the tips of the hair. So, I've used like tonic and elderflower tonic and mastiha, um, God, several other things.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
Yeah, sort of like light and but also woody and foresty
and refreshing overall.
and refreshing. Yes.
That's the
So
point.
good.
And it gives you that little bit of warmth that passes through you.
Mm-hmm. And Ents don't sit in chairs, so he just has this giant table that he gently deposits Merry and Pippin on top of. And there they sat, dangling their legs and drinking in sips, which is just so cute. And thinking about them as little kittens or little children sitting in big chairs or on the edge of the table, just kind of dangling their legs and sipping their little drinks. It's adorable. And I'm glad that they get to have this nice moment of rest.
And he lies down and has them tell him their entire story.
Mm-hmm. Lies down specifically so that the drink doesn't get to his head and make him fall asleep, which
Yes.
is also just so casual and intimate. Like, it just makes me think of when we hang out with our group of friends, somebody inevitably ends up laying down on the floor. It's floor time. That's something that you do, at least if you're us, with people you really know and really like. I'm not going to lay down on the floor in front of a stranger in a casual get together. But
It's typically
Treebeard
your
is typically, yes. But Treebeard is just chill like that. So he's just going to go lay down. It's like reverse therapy. He's the one on the couch. They're the ones telling him the story.
Yeah. But he does ask if they've ever seen any Ents round there. Well, not Ents.
Mm-hmm.
Entwives, I should really say.
Around the Shire, you mean?
Around the Shire. Yes. And Pippin goes, "Are they like you at all?" And Treebeard says, "Yes, well, no. I do not really know now. But they would like your country, so I just wondered."
Mm-hmm. And we get
No.
lore about, well, we get history with Saruman first, and then we get stuff about the Entwives. Which one do you want to do first?
I think we'll go in chronological order. He again talks about, and we've had this mentioned a few times, basically things popping out of myth and things being unexplainable, right? 9 forgotten riders appear to hunt little folk who are not in the old lists, and Gandalf takes them on a journey, and Galadriel harbors them, and orcs pursue them down all the leagues of Wilderland. He says he's not concerned about the great wars. That is the business of wizards. Wizards are always troubled about the future. I do not like worrying about the future. I am not altogether on anybody's side because nobody is altogether on my side, if you understand me. Nobody cares for the woods as I care for them, not even elves nowadays. And then, yeah, he talks about Sauron. And who is Sauron? What has he been doing? Um, and why is he a threat? It's because he's a neighbor. It's because he lives next door. He used to be polite. He used to be decent, although he never really gave back. Like, he never really returned the same information and hospitality that Treebeard extended to him.
Yeah, I have the line. But at any rate, he used to give no trouble to his neighbors. I used to talk to him. There was a time when he was always walking about my woods. He was polite in those days, always asking my leave, at least when he met me, and always eager to listen. I told him many things that he would never have found out by himself, but he never repaid me in like kind. I cannot remember that he ever told me anything. And then Treebeard talks about how Saruman basically continued to shut down and withdraw and was always taking from the forest and its knowledge, but never giving. And Treebeard doesn't say this explicitly, but I wonder if it's implied that he feels guilty for having helped Saruman at all and having given him knowledge and shared with him when he turned out to be this evil, threatening presence. I don't know if that's the case, but I wonder about it.
And that's sort of interesting as we see, I guess, this perhaps long running thread, this little seed of evil in Sauron, this little seed of control and um, this need to take.
Mm-hmm.
Treebeard says he's plotting to become a power. He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. Right? The line also, he always asked my leave when he met me, is interesting. Of like, he knew he should be conversing with Treebeard
Mm-hmm.
and the Ents, but only when they actually found out about him.
Yeah. He
If
knows
they
enough to
weren't
be nice to
there,
their face.
right? Exactly. If they weren't there, he was just going to do as he pleased. And so he'd be nice to their face because they'll give him information, they'll give him power. But he, towards the end of this little piece, he gets angry.
Yeah.
Talking about how the trees have been cut down. Says, "Curse him, root and branch. Many of those trees were my friends, creatures I had known from nut and acorn. Many had voices of their own that are lost forever now." And there's a little break, and he says, "I have been idle. I have let things slip. It must stop." And then he stands up with a jerk. The vessels of light trembled and sent up 2 jets of flame. There was a flicker like green fire in his eyes. "I will stop it," he boomed, "and you shall come with me."
Love that.
Um, and Merry and Pippin are like, "Yeah, let's fucking go." And he goes, Treebeard goes, "Good. I spoke hastily. We must not be hasty."
Yeah. Got a little bit carried away there. Let's slow down a second. But yeah, he's, despite having this slow and thoughtful approach to things, and we'll see this more with the Entmoot later, the Ents can be roused to action. They have things that they care about very passionately, and
Yes.
you shouldn't underestimate them just because they're calm and peaceful and take things at a slow pace. They are also ancient and very powerful and not to be fucked with.
Right. And, they are a force of nature. They are a personification of a force of nature, basically. And so the
Mm-hmm.
suddenness of nature's wrath makes sense
Yeah.
for them,
Yeah.
right? Nature is slow and ponderous, and growth happens, centimeter by centimeter, inch by inch over millennia until it all comes crashing down,
Mm-hmm.
right? You dig too deep, something goes wrong, the mine collapses, there's an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, an avalanche, any of these sudden instances of destruction. And at the end of that piece of destruction, everything is calm again
Mm-hmm.
and goes back to its slow, ponderous growth, right? And Treebeard doesn't stop, even though he's like, let me slow my roll. Let's not make any, dangerous decisions on a whim. But I am going to think about, like, who's going to be helpful here. There's the 3 oldest of us. There's Fangorn, Finglass, Fladrif, or Treebeard, Leaflock, and Skinbark, right? And all of their trees, their Ents. And there's not many of us left. But, you know, I dare say I could get together a fair company of our younger folks if I could make them understand the need, if I could rouse them.
Mm-hmm.
He says, none have died per se. Some have fallen in the evil chances of the long years, of course, and more have grown tree-ish. And do you want to talk about the Entings and the Entwives?
Yes. Okay. Oh, this is so depressing. So, yeah, right after that, it picks up. There have been no entings, no children, you would say, not for a terrible long count of years. You see, we lost the Entwives. And then Pippin says, how is it that they all died? And Treebeard says, well, it's not that they died, it's that we lost them. And he gives this long lore that you can fill in any blanks of. I'm just going to go over it super quickly. But basically, when the world was young, there were Ents and Entwives, and the Ent maidens were beautiful and amazing and majestic, but they fundamentally valued different things. And the Ents were wanderers, and the Entwives were more sedentary, and they valued order. And they cultivated these great gardens, and they taught a lot of their skills to mortals who revered them. And I wrote down basically that the Entwives started their own lesbian commune and were just happily doing their thing and didn't really need the regular Ents, but, or the other Ents, they're all regular Ents. You know what I mean. But then when the darkness came in the north, their great gardens were destroyed, and those are now the Brown Lands, which is just a massive fucking bummer. But there
The
has just been
darkness
this,
coming in the north, as a
yeah.
side note, that's the first age. That's when he's talking about, and he talks about this multiple times, he mentions the enemy who created trolls and orcs. That is the enemy of whom Sauron was but a servant. That
Yeah.
is Melkor or Morgoth, who is, a Valar, one of the
Hmm.
one of the beings above what Sauron is. Sauron and Gandalf and Saruman are all Maiar, right? And there's another
Yeah.
type of being. There's the Valar, right? Um, Elbereth is a Valar,
Hmm.
and so was Melkor. Um, and so the darkness in the north. Again, as we've talked about, you know, him being Fangorn being this ancient being, this ancient place. These are tales of things that we haven't really even discussed in this book yet.
Yeah.
All of the talks about, things happening back in the first war, that's all the end of the second age. That's 3,000 years ago. We're talking much further back.
Hmm.
Um,
And ever since then, there's been this ancient search on the part of the Ents to try to find the Entwives again. And they've tried and asked everyone everything that they could possibly ask to try to track them down and never found them. And it's become a subject of a lot of poetry and song by the elves. And he shares an elf song that's a dialogue between an Ent and an Entwife, and the Ent saying, please come to me, beautiful Entwife. We have these, awesome lands. When the light is on the wild wood stream and wind is on the brow, when the stride is long and breath is deep and keen the mountain air, come back to me and say my land is fair. And the Entwife basically going, nah, I'm good. I have my own awesome lands, so I'm not gonna come back to you. And then at the end, eventually they reunite. But Treebeard says that's, a hasty, mortal way of putting it, but basically true to the spirit of things, that we have been trying and trying to get the Entwives back and just never succeeded. And yeah, you go.
yeah. They make me think, his description of Entwives makes me think of them less as Ents and more as a differing type of nature spirit,
Hmm.
right? It's almost the Entings, it's a little like Pokemon evolution that like splits in two, right? Because it's not that the Ents don't desire order. We've talked about the lists, like the long lists of every living thing, and Treebeard seems to have this need to know and understand and learn, right?
Hmm.
That's order.
Yeah.
Um, but it's different from the Entwives interacting with people and teaching them agriculture and horticulture. these are two differing types of fertility spirit, basically.
Yeah. And related to fertility, I think we could do the Entings and then do more about the Ents and Entwives, because the Entings are sort of a more contained little bit. But because the Entwives are gone and the Ents can't reproduce among themselves, they've had no children. And sort of after he tells them this whole long story, he asks where Merry and Pippin are going to stand to sleep. And they tell him, oh, actually, we lay down to sleep. And then this is the part that absolutely destroyed me. Almost thought I was talking to young Entings, I did. And that, I think, is a huge part of why he feels so much fondness towards Merry and Pippin, because they remind him of these children that he maybe has never had, or at least hasn't had in a really, really long time. And he just has this powerful desire for this family that he can never have because the Entwives are gone. And he wants to nurture and love and care for these little beings. And he's not infantilizing them. I think he sees them as very capable for little mortals. But that just absolutely destroyed me, that he is having these visions and allowing himself to believe in a world where there are little Entings running around that can never be.
When he's thinking of them years down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was all I had to say on Entings, unless you had more.
No, I was just trying to figure out puns from No Children by the Mountain Goats.
Oh my
um,
god.
but Treebeard is much fonder of the missing Entwives than the singer of that song is of his ex.
Yeah.
But Treebeard also says he's going to stand in the rain. Good night. Because he's
Oh, I got.
chilling.
Yeah. It's got too many feelings, too many emotions. I'm just gonna go stand in the rain and go to sleep and have my little shower cry. But the shower is nature.
Because he's a tree.
Because he's a tree.
I love it so much. They all wake up the next morning and go to the Entmoot at Derndingle.
Which is very serious, and we should all be very serious about the Entmoot at Derndingle, and don't you dare laugh at it. This is
See, I
serious
can give you the
business.
etymology, but it is still funny.
It is. It's very
Like,
funny.
moot is a gathering of people. So the Entmoot is a gathering of Ents. And a dingle is a valley or a dell surrounded by trees. And dern comes from the Old English meaning hidden or secret. And so it's literally the gathering of Ents in the secret tree valley.
Yeah.
But
Did
it's
you
the Entmoot
want
at
to
Derndingle.
Derndingle? Did you want to do more on Entwives and Entgender now, or did you want to save that for later? Because I didn't want to breeze past
No, I
that.
mean, that is my commentary on like
Mm-hmm.
Entgender is, and I guess when we are introduced to more Ents at the Entmoot, they're all different from each other. Everyone is like a different type of tree,
Yeah.
right? And so I have to imagine that all of the Entwives are also different types of trees and different types of plants, right? Because they're all different types of spirits that are embodying the thing that they are spirits of,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is a different type of spirit of place, spirit of the land from Bombadil and Goldberry, and like Goldberry being a spirit of the water.
Yeah.
But they are still uh spirits of the land. They are still nature spirits.
Yeah, they're a little more specialized. And Pippin observes in the Entmoot, he was really expecting them to all kind of look the same, because hobbits must all look the same to Ents, and it would be reasonable to expect that, a species you're not familiar with would be hard to distinguish. But they are all very visually distinct, and they're really varied and really interesting. And I had said in one of our group chats that there's a huge potential for Ent sonas here. And one of our friends actually had made an Ent sona, but he didn't remember a lot of details of it, which is tragic. But
Yeah.
I think it's really cool.
We were talking about this in our D&D group chat this morning. And our D&D group, like for context, is made up of the two of us, your spouse, My old roommate, who we've mentioned, who has been one of multiple roommates who's listened to me recite Tolkien from standing on the table. Casey, who's the artist for the podcast, and Gungus, who is the friend with the Ent Sona and also the streamer who we've told you to send shit to his Twitter before. And Gungus was saying, he also is like me and is a huge fan of the Ents. And he was talking about how, and I have some of his what he said here because I told him we'd read some of this in the pod.
And it was behind spoiler tags, so I haven't read it. This is all secrets.
Yes. You're saying like the Ents hammer in a point about the earth itself and nature as a relevant force in the world around our characters, and as a party ultimately uncaring about the grander struggles of the story between mortals and immortals that we've seen woven through the book consistently. But also, the Ents somewhat call into question those statements too by making a more objective, visible, living, and therefore, unfortunately, killable element to this natural force, making them
Ooh.
dying off and fading, which turns them into a relevant force in that struggle, even somewhat beyond their own input. I think they then serve as a fascinating pivot to a place where we get kind of a bigger scale angle of the thematic sort of direction, how both the grandness and magic of the world is fading, and also the way that the evils present in this land are unnatural and damaging simply by existing. And it frames things great from an environmental lens, which keeps being more poignant as the story ages, unfortunately.
Gungus, you're so smart. As I'll text him later about that. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, and he started to off with saying, it's been a while, so forgive me if I'm a bit rusty on the book.
And then says like the most poetic thing ever.
He's our DM right now. And I'm terrified. I'm so excited for what he's going to pull on us.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. That because there are forces that can kill them and they are killable, that in itself is fucking with the natural order.
Right? The Ents, introduce themselves or they start the moot and they're talking in their own language, right?
Mm-hmm.
The language is like musical, it's rhythmic, it's tonal, it's chanting. Um, and so finally Merry and Pippin go for a walk.
Yeah. Is this when they go
Because
with quick beam?
no, this is before they go with quick beam.
Okay.
Um, because at one point, it was Pippin found the sound very pleasant to listen to at first, but gradually his attention wavered. After a long time, and the chant showed no signs of slackening, he found himself wondering, since Entish was such an unhasty language, whether they had yet got further than "good morning." um, I wonder what the Entish is for yes or no, he thought. And then he yawns, and Treebeard goes, I'm forgetting that you are such a hasty folk, and it's wearisome listening to a speech you do not understand. He's still holding them throughout all of
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah.
Right? Uh, you know, I've told your names to the Entmoot, and they've seen you and have agreed you're not orcs, and that a new line will be put in the old lists.
Mm-hmm.
That's as far as we've gotten, but that's quick work for an Entmoot. And then
Yeah.
you and Mary can stroll about in the dingle if you like. And so they go to stroll about. And at one point, they're talking about, what Isengard is and where it is. They're giving, some exposition for that. But so I think, and then Mary says, but I have an odd feeling about these Ents. Somehow I don't think they are quite as safe and, well, funny as they seem. They seem slow, queer, impatient, almost sad, and yet I believe they could be roused. If that happened, I would rather not be on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're a force of nature, um, in the way that the ocean is a force of nature. And man, it looks real pretty and calm, but there's depths there, and also tsunamis, and yeah.
They were warned about this forest for a reason.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And it's not just because of the dark-hearted Huorns who live in the center of it,
Hmm.
right? It is because the Ents are dangerous. You know, don't when in the previous chapter when Gimli and Aragorn and Legolas are camped at the edge of the wood, and they say, "Don't cut from the wood."
Hmm.
It's because they're trying not to anger the shepherds of the trees, which is what the Ents are. They're shepherds.
Yeah. And there's a
Right?
line somewhere about shepherds become sheep like and sheep become shepherd like, and that the distinction between sheep and shepherd, between tree and ent, can kind of fade over time, and there's a really strong connection there. So if you're fucking with one, you're fucking with the other.
Right. But eventually, Treebeard introduces them to Bregalad or Quickbeam, who is the
I love
hastiest
Quick Beam.
Ent.
Yeah.
He once said yes to an elder Ent before he had finished his question. I love how good a host Treebeard is.
Hmm.
Like, he's taken the time to learn about and understand the hobbits and see to their needs, even when he doesn't quite understand and is realizing that their needs are different from his own.
Hmm.
But he's still making sure that those needs, whether or not he fully gets them, are seen to.
Yeah.
Um, Quickbeam, so Fangorn Treebeard uh, cares for the whole of Fangorn Forest, right?
Hmm.
Quickbeam is like specialized. He's focused on like the rowan trees.
Yeah.
And he's angry that the orcs have killed the rowan trees.
And I had written down sort of going back and forth between the Ents are so kind, the Ents are great hosts, the Ents are also terrifying and you shouldn't fuck with them, but also they're lovely. Going back into the also they're lovely, when Quickbeam goes to show Merry and Pippin around, he reached down two shapely arms and gave a long fingered hand to each of the hobbits. All that day they walked about in the woods with him, singing and laughing. And that's just delightful. That's so sweet. And
Mhm.
I don't know if Quickbeam has that same yearning for the lost entings that Treebeard does, but he's down to just hold hands with the hobbits and walk around the woods and talk and laugh and have a nice time.
Yeah, I'm sure he's the youngest of the Ents while still being probably 10,000 years old.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm also thinking about my magic of friendship theory that I brought up ages ago. And this is not something I
Yes.
put in my notes, it's just occurring to me
No,
now. So I'm
please.
sort of thinking out loud. But I think potentially another quality of hobbits in general, and our hobbits specifically, is that they do have this ability to connect with other people. In their own land, in the Shire, they're excellent hosts and hospitality is really important to them. But I think they also just, there's something in their nature that just ingratiates them to other people very quickly. And it's hard not to love a hobbit. It's hard not to be kind to a hobbit. And something about their ability to share space and to share stories is a little bit contagious. And that is something that serves them really well when they go into situations that could kind of go either way, if they're with the elves or with Beorn and the Hobbit, or here with the Ents, with beings that could turn them away, that would be well within their rights to not help them, or that could be angered very easily. The presence of hobbits does help smooth a lot of things over, because you can just tell by their vibes that they have this goodness and earnestness that it kind of makes it hard to be mad at them.
They spend the night and the next day with Quickbeam up until the afternoon on the third day of the Entmoot, when things start to get loud again.
Because they've just been talking for 3 straight days.
They've just been talking for 3 straight days and nights. And the Ents are coming we come with roll of drum, tarunda, runda, runda, rum. Um, I love this bit.
Yes.
They're so pissed.
Treebeard was successful. He has impressed upon them the urgency of this situation.
Yeah, come join the moot. We are off. We are off to Isengard. Guard.
That song, by the way, did we determine that it's 17 years old?
19, I think. I think
Oh, God.
2005. I think it's 2005.
Yeah, that's, oh my God, that song is in college now.
um, but some 50 followers were following behind Treebeard. So there's, roughly 50 Ents, I think, how
Mhm.
few of them there are, right? The flash and flicker of their eyes could be seen. This focus on their eyes is so cool.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, in these beings that are like trees and so like earthly things, right? Humans are really good at pointing out, what looks like faces in,
Mhm.
a man on the moon and faces in trees and all that. And it's always about the eyes. It's always because we see like the eyes and then like something that sort of comes down to make the rest of the face.
Yeah.
And so I think, the focus on the eyes is interesting because that's what probably Merry and Pippin are focusing on as the most familiar to them as a notation of like an intelligent being.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, if they
Um,
didn't have eyes, if they didn't have faces, it would probably be a lot harder for them to relate.
yeah. And this poem, this song that they sing as they're marching southwards to Isengard, though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone, is another one of my favorite poems. And I feel like at the end of all this, I'm going to need to make a top 10 list of
Oh,
like Tolkien
absolutely.
poems, right?
Yeah.
Rhodes is on there and The Cat and the Moon's on there. And this one's definitely there.
The winter one is on there.
The winter one's definitely on there, yes. To land of gloom with tramp of doom, with roll of drum, we come, we come. To Isengard, with doom we come, with doom we come, with doom we come.
And there's more commentary on the Doom where Treebeard is saying, "Of course, it is likely enough, my friends," he said slowly. "Likely enough that we are going to our doom, the last march of the Ents. But if we stayed at home and did nothing, doom would find us anyway, sooner or later. That thought has long been growing in our hearts, and that is why we are marching now. It is not a hasty resolve." So there's a lot there. There's obviously the this is not hasty, even though it looks hasty, even though we only talked about it for 3 days. This is something that we've been aware of for a long time. And it reminds me of when we were talking to Galadriel
Aha.
about how she was aware of the impending fall of the elves and the fall of Lorien and the
And
different
Haldir
approaches.
commented on it too.
Yeah. And the
So yeah, I noted that exact thing.
yes. Yeah, and then we have the different approaches, right? And Galadriel is limiting her own personal involvement in the party's affairs for her own reasons. But the Ents approach is to go bust down the fucking gates of Isengard. And I love that. I love this super aggro approach of, well, if we're going to die anyway, then we should die for this cause that is important to us.
Right. They talk about, like, and Mary goes, "Are you really going to break down the doors of Isengard?" And Treebeard goes, "You don't know how strong we are.
Mm-hmm.
You know about trolls and how strong they are. We are made of the bones of the earth. We can split stone like the roots of trees, only quicker, far quicker, if our minds are roused. If we are not hewn down or destroyed by fire or blast of sorcery, we could split Isengard into splinters and crack its walls into rubble." So, and then talks about this is likely the doom of the Ents.
When bad
But
things inevitably happen to them, I'm going to be so fucking heartbroken. I'm really attached to the Ents.
I told you they're my favorites, and we
They're
literally
really
get
good.
like this one chapter where we're thoroughly focused on the Ents, and I'm in love.
Mhm.
But they go and they've reached themselves and they take the hobbits to Isengard. That may have been the original goal of the the orcs, but now the hobbits are at Isengard with doom at their backs.
And you were talking about, when we were planning how we would do the chapters for this, I don't know, season, this book, whatever. You were saying how the chapters really portion themselves off nicely into pairs. And that's so true because we have the hobbits are going to Isengard in captivity, to the hobbits are riding in triumph with the Ents to the same place they were originally going, but a really nice parallel contrast.
Yeah. The chapter ends with at last they stood upon the summit and looked down into a dark pit, the great cleft at the end of the mountains, Nan Kurunir, the valley of Sauron. Night lies over Isengard, said Treebeard. They are so fucking cool. So before we finish, I want to talk a little bit about the mythology of Ents and how Tolkien came up with them and how they've become sort of widespread in modern fantasy.
Yeah, please do.
Because that's our commentary for the chapters, unless you have anything else.
My last little tiny thought in my brain was there was a line, I think it was in the first chapter we talked about in the Uruk-hai, where Pippin is saying, yeah, it makes sense that Elrond didn't want to send us on this journey because I'm feeling way out of my depth here. But having gone from this hobbit has no place on this journey, send them back to the Shire, to, yeah, I just raised an entire army of Ents, no big deal. That's growth. That's significant. That's a really big contribution to the cause. Now, more so than just staying alive, they have brought an extremely powerful force along with them. So I can't wait for them to reunite with the rest of the party, who I'm sure have been worried sick about them, and just see them having a lovely time with their new tree friends.
These two chapters are in some ways the reverse of the hike up Cahadras and then the descent into Moria,
Mm.
where, or I guess not quite the reverse, but it comes to a similar vibe, right? You're getting to the same place you were intending to go. And even to the same place, like they always, that you were foreshadowing about, they always mentioned they were probably going to have to go through Moria. But instead of choosing to go through Moria, they were forced to go through Moria. And that ended with Gandalf's death. And uh, but in this, instead of being forced to go to Isengard, they are choosing to go to Isengard, and that is going to lead to Isengard's destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just parallels.
Love it. It's awesome.
I have one other thing actually from the books to call back to,
Yeah.
which is from uh, the very beginning of Fellowship when they're discussing it's all the hobbits around in the tavern in Bywater
Mm-hmm.
talking about how things have gotten really queer out in the land lately. And Sam says, but what about these tree men, these giants, as you might call them? They do say that one bigger than a tree was seen up away beyond the North Moors not long back. Someone goes, who's they? My cousin Hal, for one. Uh, says he did, perhaps. Your Hal's always saying he's seen things, and maybe he sees things that ain't there. But this one was as big as an elm tree and walking 7 yards to a stride if it was an inch. Then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm tree on the North Moors. Then Hal can't have seen one, said Ted.
Could he have seen an Entwife? Could it have been one near the Shire?
Anyway, that's the only other little piece of commentary that just interesting interesting to think about whether or not there is an ent or an ent like being up north of the Shire or an
Mm.
Entwife because they'd like that kind of country. But let's talk about Ents and uh, myth. The word Ent comes from the Old English word for giant. And giants are one of those types of beings that show up in one form or another in a lot of mythology, like
Hmm.
pretty much all over the world. Either as beings that are physically like larger and stronger than humans, or as beings that sort of represent some form of primordial chaos. And we can read the Ents, Tolkien's Ents, as like from either of those origins, right? There aren't other giants really mentioned much in Middle Earth, like as characters, other than, Hal saying he saw a giant. Well, could be
Hmm.
that. And in The Hobbit, there's the stone or storm giants that are throwing rocks to each other and nearly hit the company as they're crossing the Misty Mountains, right? But Tolkien doesn't really talk about giants through the rest of the story.
Hmm.
So, whether or not there are like ent-like beings of other primordial forces of nature and not just like the forest, the ents and the entwives are like plant versions, but maybe there's storm versions.
Ooh.
Um, Tolkien doesn't elaborate on that. Some of his early writings discuss other giants, and there's giants featured in the mythology of Middle Earth, and like in these stories that people tell each other in Middle Earth, right? But
Hmm.
there's not really giants out and about except in the Misty Mountains and the Hobbit,
Yeah.
you know. And we could perhaps say those are trolls in the same way that like they mention goblins throughout the Hobbit, and then in Lord of the Rings they become referred to as orcs,
Hmm.
right? It's just sort of like, oh, this is other uh, um, other pieces of mythology that changed.
Yeah.
Treebeard describing Ents as being made from the bones of the earth. That calls back to beings like Ymir from Norse mythology, who is the giant from whose body the world is literally created. His bones become hills, his hair becomes trees, his skull becomes the sky, his brain is clouds, etc., etc., etc.
Hmm.
His flesh is the earth. It calls to mind Gaia in Greek myth, who is, the primordial earth deity who gave birth to the giants and the titans,
Yeah.
right? Um, it calls to mind various talking trees from mythologies around the world. Let me find my talking trees Wikipedia article.
Amazing. I
Um,
love that that's a Wikipedia article.
yes, we have the Greek talking elm, about two philosophers who heard a tree talking to them. Um, the rustling of leaves in an oak tree is regarded as the voice of Zeus. Alexander the Great visited a talking tree in the Shahnameh. The weeping date palm in Islamic um, stories. Um, Merlin gets turned into a tree in Arthurian myth, right? In English folklore, willows stalk humans. Old Man Willow. Um, Dryads. There's world trees, trees of life, um, nature spirits, Demeter. Like all of these deities and beings and spirits in some way resemble the descriptions given of Ents
Hmm.
or of Entwives. So Tolkien is clearly drawing on that. Um, and we talked a little bit earlier, I have noted in my notes here about the relationship between primordial chaos and primordial order, or civilization and order,
Yeah.
um, and the the giants and the Ents and the Entwives, right? In Norse mythology, with this being the conflict, the chaos and order, right? The giants and Jotuns, who are representations of that chaos, um, are described pretty much the same as the Aesir and Vanir, the gods who are representations of order, right? The gods are sometimes there are certain gods described as Aesir and sometimes as Jotnar. They are children of of giants, they're children of giants and gods. Like, this is what the Ents and Entwives are reminding me of, right? The Ents are the older, more primordial beings, with the Entwives having more of a focus on like sedentism and civilization and growth, but they're
Hmm.
two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
right? And uh, so it's interesting to me, though, that the settled versions are the ones that have faded or disappeared somewhere, while these primordial wandering beings are still around. Granted, their range has been severely restricted, but they're still here.
Yeah.
That fits in with, I think, Tolkien's description of this world as a post apocalyptic uh, place, right?
Hmm.
Where the great civilizations of the past are gone. The greatest civilization that we're going to see in this quote unquote great, for a given value of that, is Gondor,
Hmm.
right? That is the thing that most closely resembles these ancient, towers of Rome and Troy and, you the fallen classical world, basically. And so these primordial titans, these Ents who are still around, they're there because nature will still and always manage to claw back little pieces even after civilization's gone,
Hmm.
has come and gone through. But the danger of someone like Sauron and their technological progress, the danger there is that eventually they will completely wipe out this primordial nature such that there's nothing to eventually grow back. And the other two pieces of how Tolkien came up with Treebeard and the Ents. Treebeard is C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Treebeard's voice and mannerisms are based on C.S. Lewis and his teaching style because he was also a professor and they were friends and
Hmm.
they liked poking fun at each other.
I love that.
And so Treebeard is meant to be C.S. Lewis.
The
um,
original Ent-sona.
yes. And finally, my last piece for this episode is the Shakespeare angle. So in Macbeth, Macbeth is informed that he will not be vanquished until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Until the wood comes to the hill, you're going to be fine. But eventually, the Birnam Wood comes to the hill because the soldiers cut branches from Birnam Wood and they carry them before them, so they look like trees walking along. They look like the forest. And Tolkien thought that was so dumb.
I also think that's so dumb. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Um, and so he wanted to, he said, create a world in which the trees could actually march to war.
Yeah.
And so he made Ents and Hjorns, and they
I love
actually
it.
marched to war.
Yeah. A bunch of soldiers hiding behind branches. That is, you deserved. I mean, Macbeth says a lot of stuff that he deserves to be defeated for. But if you fall for that, then you deserve what's coming to you because that is just awful.
Mhm. Um, I longed to devise a setting in which the trees might really march to war, he said
Amazing.
in his letter to W.H. Auden. Anyway, um, that is all I have for these two chapters. We will come back next week, not next week, 2 weeks from now.
Next time.
Next time, we will return to our three hunters and what they've been getting up to while the Ents are marching to war. Um, but, Sammy, before we go out, do you have anything else you want to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I feel like with these two chapters, I could just sit here all day and keep coming up with more stuff. But for the sake of a podcast that has to have a beginning, middle, and end, I think we have reached the end.
And so, good night unto you all. Just to throw in a little piece more Shakespeare again, I've used that one before. But if you would like to hear what happens next time, and what has been going on with the Three Hunters, you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We release every other Tuesday. But in the meantime, we have a back catalog you can listen to if you have not already. And you can follow us on our social media. We are at FanAppPod on Instagram, TikTok, and X. Every week from here on in, we will be having a post on Instagram where we'll, post some images that talk about things or refer to things we talk about on the podcast, and have a little map of the section of Middle Earth that we are talking about, because there's a lot going on in there. And Tolkien's really particular about where things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things are not labeled on the map. Like Fangorn Forest is just Fangorn. Like, we're not going to see, you're not going to see his house and the Derndingle labeled.
What a shame. You should always label the Derndingle. If your Derndingle is unlabeled, that's just sloppy. You don't want a sloppy Derndingle.
If you would like a sloppy Derndingle.
Can that be the title of this episode? Can be You Don't Want a Sloppy Derndingle?
Perhaps. Yeah, we'll see. If you have theories on what a Derndingle actually is, and not based on the etymology that I said earlier, message them to us on our social media or at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com. Please subscribe to our podcast. Please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It helps other people find the podcast. Tell your friends. Subject them to sloppy Derndingles and Shakespeare references.
Were there any sloppy Derndingles in that romance book you were reading? Because I think that could have really livened things up.
I don't think so. I think it was really just vanilla.
Tragic. Anyway.
We'll have to wait for the next Katie Robert book to come out for a sloppy Derndingle. Urban Dictionary us. What one of those is. Thank you and good night. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Ryn and Sam. Our music was composed and performed by James, and our art is by Casey Turgeon. This podcast is created for non-commercial entertainment purposes, and the opinions expressed therein are our own and are not reflective of the opinions of any other person or organization. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien estate and is used here under fair use.